It's also interesting because, like, I have it on pretty good authority. It's not really a done deal that either the Big Ten or the SEC would take Florida State. And hey, if we're moving to an explicitly professional model in 3 or 4 years, there might not be a Big Ten. There might not be an
Hmm.
SEC.
What is up, everybody? It is Jake back at it again with Master Football. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to be up to date on all things college football, hit that red subscribe button right now. You will not be disappointed. Also, the like button too, and follow on Twitter/X. That fam is growing. And if you like EA college football content, go over to my other channel in the description here, the MF Film Room. But enough about all that. Let's get into that college football content right now. Let's go. In the video today, we're going to be meeting with Matt Brown to discuss a lot of issues regarding the business of college sports right now, because we've got so many things coming up. We've got NIL, we've got potentially private equity. There's lots of scary terms that are being thrown around here. I touch base with all of them today. But first, let's introduce our friend, Mr. Matt Brown. Coming over here to extrapointsmb.com for the mailbag. This is his site right here where he basically comes through and he talks about all this stuff in terms of the 990s for 40 NIL collectives. He talks about an affiliate contract between the West Coast Conference, Oregon State, Washington State. He talks about NIL, EA college football. He is the unofficial expert of EA college football. I address a little bit of that in the interview today. But like I said, here is his mailbag. I'm going to make sure I include this here. Go hit that subscribe button on it. It only costs $8 a month. You'll be up to date on all of this stuff out here. Also, if you're over on Twitter/X, come over here and follow him at Matt Brown EP. I'm going to make sure I include this in the description as well. Like I said, enjoy this video, comment on it, share it, everything like that. We really appreciate it. But without further ado, talking about the business of college sports, here's my interview with Matt Brown. All right, guys, welcome back to Master Football with Jake Posey. We are here with our friend Matt Brown, and we are going to get rolling out of respect for his time here. Matt Brown, here we go, my friend. Let's start. So there's a lot of new terms in college football that have been brought up in the last couple of years. NIL, transfer portal, expansion of the CFP. Right now, what direction is college sports, and I would say college sports business, generally heading into right now?
Yeah, the challenging thing about writing about all of this, and I think following it, is that we're really moving in a direction that's just very, very different from how college football and college sports have looked for the last 100 years. A lot of the kind of core assumptions that athletes need to be full-time enrolled students and that they are part of the athletic department, which is a part of the educational mission of the institution, that athletes should not be directly compensated by institutions, that there should be some, general range of what expenses should look like. All of that's really going out the window because there are multiple massive federal court cases that are challenging a lot of those assumptions. We're already in a more professionalized system than it's ever been. It's never really been truly amateur, not even in 1905, but it's more explicitly professional. And that's the way that we're going. And so for a fan and for anybody else, it can be a little bit disorienting because if you're Ohio State or Alabama or Texas, it's going to be more expensive. It might look different, but you can continue to still function more or less the same as you've been doing now, most likely. But if you're ECU or Boston College or Purdue or a litany of other places, the math gets much more complicated. And I can't promise you that the changes are always good or that they're always bad, but what we've assumed the world will look like is not what we should assume it will look like in 2027.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you talk about that too, how it was the whole amateurism debate where it was like, oh yeah, well, you guys don't need to worry about how much money you guys are making. You guys are here all for the love of the game. But as universities, we're going to try and make as much money off of them as we can in these instances. You also mentioned too that, like you said, college sports for Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia, Alabama might not look all that different in the next couple of years. It will be different, but not as different as it's going to be, like you said, for those mid and especially those lower tier FBS teams. So again, talk about that. How do you think it could be different for those mid and lower tier FBS teams?
Sure. Or especially, I think for Division I institutions that might not sponsor football at all, right?
Hmm.
What people forget is that a lot of Division I schools sponsor sports, not because they're trying to win championships. If it happens, great, but that's not what they're doing it. And they're not doing it to make money from ticket sales or broadcast revenue or anything else. What they're really doing is trying to recruit students. If you sponsor 25 sports and you're not giving full scholarships to all those people, they're going to pay tuition. Like that's important revenue. Or that's going to be a marketing tool that's going to bring more people to be aware of your college, right? Like I went to Ohio State. I went to a land grant state flagship institution. They don't have these problems. But if you went to a private school in Pennsylvania or New England, some of the Bible Belt schools or these regional public schools, you're in Eastern Illinois or Youngstown State kind of places, like athletics is explicitly part of the enrollment conversation. And if you suddenly have to pay those athletes directly because they're employees, you don't, not have to pay them very much. It might only be 18 bucks an hour, 15 bucks an hour, like a student worker. That changes the financial calculus of how you run an athletic department completely. Like the math doesn't math for Youngstown State to sponsor as many sports as it does if they have to pay for workers' compensation and $20 an hour and take out payroll taxes. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. That's just the reality. And so they're going to have to reevaluate what their athletic offerings look like. And that's going to be true farther down. I think you're also going to see some institutions that could afford to do this, and they're just going to decide maybe they don't want to. You know, part of the core legal question about employment that I think maybe fans sometimes misinterpret, it's not about revenue. The legal question is not, are athletes employees if they make a gajillion dollars from football contracts and play in front of 90,000 seat stadiums? Saying, are they employees because of how universities are controlling the student's conduct, right? The Johnson case, NCAA, Johnson v. NCAA, which is going to be ruled on this year. Those defendants are not Penn State football players. They're dudes at like Bucknell and Villanova, like FCS games that 3,000 people go to and nobody makes any money. And so that, depending on how expansive that decision is, that might include athletes at just about every mid-major, maybe even Division II institutions. And so you could see a lot of sports being dropped. You could see sports being moved to more of a club model where they're still compete with other schools, but it's not nearly as intense or as structured as maybe it had before. You might see some schools deciding, yeah, we'll pay them and we'll just do everything we've been doing before. And the money will come from us just paying our coaches a lot less or us buying a lot less stuff, which is how college sports works too, as well. It's just gonna be different for every institution. Very, very transformative change.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded into my next question here, which is the big conversation that's happening right now. College athletes are going to be employees. What does this mean for college sports? And like you said, does this affect every sport? I think we kind of know that football, basketball probably going to be in one realm, whereas I mean, no disrespect to men's tennis, but probably not going to be as lucrative as the football and basketball. Kind of talk about what it means in college athletes being employees.
Yeah, I mean, there's a book on that, right? Like it's a hugely expansive question. Again, your employment status does not depend on the profitability of your labor or the size of the company. You're an employee if you do employee stuff and your employer expects employee-like things from you, even if they're not paying you. Like we have, Supreme Court precedent ruling on nonprofit employee, laborers being employees. Even people that didn't necessarily want to be employees were ruled as employees. So which athletes get that designation? I don't think anybody can really tell you for certain because that depends on multiple court cases. It's a reasonable assumption if anybody's going to be an employee, Ohio State's running back probably should be. But depending on what I think will ultimately go up to the Supreme Court. If I think there's going to be a circuit split on some of these questions at the lower levels, but could be any number of athletes, and that's what's causing some concern among administrators at Division II and Division III or smaller schools. It's not all bad though, because one of the other things that athletes are employees that you could have is then they can unionize and you can have collective bargaining. And collective bargaining, beyond creating predictability in benefits and rules for the athletes, also allows both sides to agree on restrictions and certain terms that then can't be sued on antitrust grounds. Like you may have heard of a collective bargaining agreement when you're talking about NBA players or NFL players. So if you're a fan and you're like, listen, I hate that the transfer portal means that there's perpetual free agency, and I'm a coach and I hate that my guy can leave at any time. I mean, can't keep him, and we're constantly re-recruiting and babying our own guys, and it's harder for us as a fan to be engaged. Well, if you move to an employment model, you can get rid of all that. Just like the NFL says, okay, here's our free agency period. We're going to sign you to multi-year contracts, and we're going to bring order to this. You can restrict outside income as part of a CBA. You can say, listen, Ole Miss running back, it's not permitted for fans to have a separate slush fund to pay your salary, or for the barbecue joint down the street to pay you $300,000 as a way of getting around the salary cap. This is the money you can make from your salary. Here's what you have to report otherwise. That's what happens in pro sports too. So it would be a transformative change, and it would likely mean some things that fans are really excited about and are positive for athletes and positive for schools. And it will probably mean some there'll be some losers, both school losers. There'll be some athletes that'll be in a worse off position. There'll be some fans that don't like it. And that's how any transformative change happens. And the nitty gritty of it, like that's a major part of my beat. That's what I'm trying to better understand every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had mentioned there too that even certain instances of employees who don't want to be employees, like you said, volunteers or something like that, can still be designated according to national labor relations or something like that.
Yep.
Could that fall in line with something like, could you see a situation, and then this is completely out here in left field, where you
Yeah.
collectively bargain and the non-revenue sports maybe don't get paid, but they're able to get scholarships? Is that something you could collectively bargain
Yeah.
theoretically?
That's entirely possible, right? You can sit down there if, in a CBA and decide what benefits are part and not part of that package, and what the hour limits are and what the restrictions are. And could you theoretically have a world where, your compensation exists in kind or in some other way? Yeah, I think that's potentially possible. It will be complicated to get there. And also what complicates a lot of this too is that if the university is the employee, we have states in the South that prohibit public sector unions or they'll make it impossible to organize and to create that CBA absent other kinds of state law. And to people who are listening to this, I want to just say, like, I have a lot of empathy for fans that are like, man, I'm into college football explicitly so I don't have to think about something called the National Labor Relations Board or something, right? This is my relief from politics. I don't want to hear what US senators think about that. And I get it. But because these are public institutions, um, you can't divorce the like explicitly politics and labor law and finance from how this sport is organized. And these are big questions for the structural future of college football.
Yeah, and if you think about that too, it's not that oh everything's changing nowadays in the future. All this stuff is changing. It's like no, we're actually looking back and seeing the fact that one side was doing this for the love of the game, and the other side was absolutely trying to milk as once they got into the billions of dollars in the contracts, I think it kind of became very clear that this is not your traditional like club team. Okay, Ohio State football is an absolute money generator. Alabama football is money generated, and so on. So yeah, I think that it to argue for. I can't believe I'm arguing. I'm holding water for the big institutions here, but are not. I'm not holding water for them. I'm holding water for the future of college football. But it
Yeah.
already was kind of a like don't ask, don't tell how much money we're making situation, and
Yeah, and not only that, not only the revenue, from television and for coaching salaries and for athletic directors and for a lot of vendors and third parties in this space, but it's also about control, right? Your paper agreement says you have a 4-year athletic scholarship, but you and me and God knows that people get cut, and that your ability to remain in school and get a diploma is predicated on your athletic ability and your relationship with your coach, who, by the way, can leave at any time without penalty. We all know, or at least we should, if we follow the sport closely, know that you generally can't major in whatever you want. Like because of your practice schedule and your travel schedule, we have something called academic clustering, where particularly high-level football and basketball players are strongly encouraged to take certain classes or majors, and that's why you might look at a team and go, there's 85 dudes on this team, and 49 of them are general studies majors. They're all in the same like two comms departments. They might have wanted to study English. They might have wanted to study business, but their employment doesn't let them do that. So I would look at all of this. This isn't just about trying to redistribute wealth and make sure that athletes who could tear their ACL at any time could get their fair share. It's also about redistributing power, because the power structure between management and labor here is way more one-sided than it is in the pros. And that also, includes even at the bottom, because you could talk to some tennis players at Elon and they might not think they're being exploited, and maybe they're not. But you still have to follow the law. And that's what a lot of these conversations are all about right now.
sure. Well, now it's the big one, the big boogeyman, and we've heard this a lot more in the coming future here. I've seen this. I wasn't really talking about this like 12 months ago, and now
Yeah.
this word, the scary boogeyman, is coming up. Private equity. What is private equity, and how could it potentially impact college sports, specifically football? How would they be involved? What does that kind of look like?
Yeah. When we talk about private equity, we talk about venture capital, we talk about what we call institutional investors, are these groups that have enormous amounts of money in capital. And they will often invest this in a variety of businesses in exchange for some control over how the business operates. They hope that the money gives the business the liquidity and capital to grow very quickly. And then that PE, that investment company, then wants to flip that equity, right? And it's usually not at, you know, 5, 6%, 10%, or even 2x. These entities are generally looking to throw in a bunch of money and then make a bunch of money back. 10x, 50x, 100x, right? To flip things. And part of the concern is that for many of these institutions, once they kick that money in and they get some control over the enterprise, they realize that the best way to maximize that investment is to not to grow the company, but to strip it for parts. And part of the reason you see me and maybe some of my colleagues raising this alarm the most right now is because one of the industries that has been most obliterated by takeovers from private equity firms has been newspapers, major metropolitan newspapers, where people have come in, they've bought an equity stake, they fired 60% of the staff, they shut down some bureaus, the paper's still profitable, but then the guys leave and everyone's out of work and the paper sucks. Or it might happen with, you know, a Toys R Us kind of place, right? You come in, you buy a profitable brand, you load it up with debt, you strip it for parts, you leave, store closes. So part of the risk of one of these entities becoming involved in like a college conference or an athletic department is they might decide, okay, we're going to kick in 600 million bucks. Why the hell are we sponsoring college baseball? Why the hell are we giving so many benefits to athletes when the most efficient way to capture the money is to raise ticket prices, cancel half of our vendor agreements, lay off 40% of the staff, throw the money around real estate development around the stadium, make it look like the Carolina Panthers, and get the hell out? And that's great for people that have their money tied up in BlackRock. That might be terrible for consumers, might be terrible for athletes or people participating in the industry. It might also be great because if we're looking at this period of enormous change, let's say you're Texas Tech, let's say you're Pitt or something, and you have to start paying athletes and you have to change into this new model. Well, maybe one of these investors comes in and gives you enough capital that you can then begin to absorb those costs without having to do mass layoffs. And then, you know, try to run your department a little bit more like a profitable business. College sports is in this weird world where it's clearly on paper a business, like they care about maximizing revenue, but it's also not really run like a business. It's a nonprofit. They're not trying to show a profit. They're trying to do other, goals and to show to the public that they're not, capturing a 60% margin because there's no investors to return that money to. Mm-hmm. Maybe in a more corporatized world that changes. I look at it as very risky, but I'm a professional journalist. So I know lots of examples of PE coming in and screwing everything up with institutions I care about. Not just newspapers, but also private, the private home market and some other industries. But I can understand how somebody else might feel differently about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I heard the example here. The private equity looks for really, really popular brands that aren't ran very well. And that's kind of what they kind of look for in this instance. Like you said, unfortunately, when they look at that, they're probably going to look at, let's just take a big university. You look at University of Southern California. They are netting a profit off football. They're netting a profit off of, well, technically based on how they do the books, off of basketball.
Yeah, maybe not. Yeah.
But then like water polo, they're going to be like, oh, well, we already know what we're going to do here. Come in here and cut all the non-revenue sports, maximize the revenue sports. But like you said, though, I think you mentioned here the world of massive change coming up. This is kind of a bonus question I got here for you. What's the next big movement here? Is it Florida State leaving the ACC? What do we have coming up? You think is going to happen next?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of seismic things, and I'm not trying to evade the question, but there's a bunch that could kind of happen all around the same time. The Florida State legal situation with the ACC is definitely a huge story to monitor. If Florida State is able to negotiate that exit package down to under $200 million, right now it's give or take $500 million between buying out of the GOR and the actual exit fees, and that's part of the lawsuit. If they win that lawsuit or they negotiate elsewhere and it gets knocked down to under 200, Florida State could probably borrow that money from banks, and they'll be out immediately. And if that happens, North Carolina will do the same thing in 3 days. Mm-hmm. And Miami and Clemson and potentially other institutions will do that too. And then there's basically no ACC because nobody else can hope to bring anywhere close to that amount of value. You are now the gentrified American Athletic Conference, and everybody mm-hmm. has some major challenges there. It's also interesting because, like, I have it on pretty good authority. It's not really a done deal that either the Big Ten or the SEC would take Florida State. It's not that they're not a great brand, but there's a lot of operational challenges to getting bigger than 18. There's some political issues with Florida State University that might make it dicey for the Big Ten. And hey, if we're moving to an explicitly professional model in 3 or 4 years, there might not be a Big Ten. There might not mm-hmm. be an SEC. There might just be the Champions Collegiate Classic of 52 teams that all sell their television rights jointly like the NFL does and have one joint commissioner. And it doesn't matter what league you join because there's just
Mhm.
one thing. That's a real possibility. So the stakes could be higher for both Florida State or the ACC. If the ACC wins, they might be able to head this thing off for 4 or 5 years, give themselves some more flexibility. That's worth paying attention to. It's worth monitoring. Johnson v. NCAA. Whatever the outcome is almost certain to be appealed, but that case should be decided sometime this year. You have additional National Labor Relations Board meetings, both with whether USC athletes should be employees or Dartmouth men's basketball on the complete other side of the country, other financial scope. Those will be appealed, but that will also signal to the NCAA, you know, can we keep fighting this or do we have to fold now? So those are three massive things. There's a few smaller ones that I think are relevant to my world, like about how ticket pricing is working in the future. But if you're from the outside, like those are three uh potential fissures for
Sure.
college sports as we know it.
Do you think, a quick one before we get on to our EA college football question here, do you
Yeah.
think in 2050 that FBS football will be separate from the NCAA? Or do you think, like, what do you think is going to happen in 2050?
In 2050, oh, brother, I'll be glad if I'm alive in 2050. I don't think FBS football as we know it exists in 2030.
Wow.
We could have some. I would expect very significant structural changes well before anyone's current television contract ends. In 2050, there's no way. I can't imagine anyway FBS football or the NCAA as we know it existing. I think the question is more like, what does this look like in 2028? Do we have does the Big Ten still exist? Is there a separation of FBS football or of high end FBS football from that? But we still have the vestiges of the college athletic system, or have we abandoned all of that? And Ohio State Buckeyes Football LLC just licensed everything from Ohio State and runs a professionalized outfit. Those changes, I think, are coming much, much quicker than
Wow.
2050.
That's crazy. All right. Now on to what everybody really wants to talk about here. All
I
right.
appreciate everybody listening to the business lecture here first. I know why people typically want me to hop on YouTube.
Don't worry. I wanted to get you on for
No,
my main
sure.
channel first, but
Yeah.
this part I'm going to cut this up and also put this on my other channel
Sure.
here. All right. So you have been the unofficial insider for EA college football the last few months, and like I said before, I put in quotations, possibly too much of an insider, according to EA in some instances here. Recently, you reported that the faces of players have been requested from some universities.
Yeah.
How is EA possibly going to enter in 11,000 faces into a video game?
Yeah, you can't bring 11,000 people to Florida and kind of have them go through the car wash and everything, right? Like it's structurally impossible. And while a couple of developers have said, we might look at doing a couple of more technically expansive renderings for a handful of people. The biggest way they're looking to do it right now is by reaching out to sports information departments who have to do standardized professional headshots of everybody on the roster and say, send us those. That way we can go take the official photographs as long as they meet these dimensions and are of this resolution, this high quality, and we can use that to deduce and along with their biographical information. Then we can enter in, hey, what's your name, your height, your weight, your position, your relative skin tone, your facial hair situation, and your eye color and those things. Because remember, you're behind a helmet, right? Like you don't have to render the specifics like you do in NBA 2K. And then once players opt into that rights package, and which will come out later this year, well, then they've already got a head start on developing the likeness and everything. And if the guy says no, then you just delete those things that you put in there. So like the main asset is going to be official headshots and official photography and information from the universities themselves. And you have to get started on that now, even though we don't even know who's going to exactly be on all the rosters entirely, just because 11,000 people, right? Like somebody might change schools. They're not going to change races. They're not going to gain 6 inches or gain 200 pounds. So you can start some of that a couple of months in advance.
Absolutely. And another thing with that too, and I read here before, and you correct me on this if I'm wrong here, but
Yeah.
the service academies can't have NIL deals. Does
Yeah.
that mean that they're just going to be randomized rosters? Is it QB 12 for Air Force? What's going to happen with them?
So, as best as I understand it, and I probably owe a couple of these schools a follow-up conversation, is that it's correct. If you're a junior at West Point, you're a federal government employee. You're a troop. Like you're not a regular student, and so you have different regulations, and you can't do an endorsement deal. You're as a member of the military, your ability to get outside income deeply restricted. But the administration and the football coaches and the athletes, all three of those schools desperately want their players' full likenesses to be in the game. The schools are going to license like their intellectual property into the game. So their lawyers are trying to figure out a solution. And that's not an NCAA issue. That's not a general counsel at the Air Force Academy issue. That's a Pentagon issue. And it's one that they've been aware of for months. I am not aware of a specific resolution. That might be something that happens much later. So what I can share is that they don't like to be in the game. They are trying to exhaust legal remedies to potentially be in the game. It is possible that they won't be in the game because the players themselves, right? Because those three schools just have to operate on very different rules than everybody else. But when I say that, that doesn't mean Air Force won't be in the game. Air Force will, but it might be QB12. Like that's a possibility.
Well, that'd break their hearts. Like you said, it'd probably be a good like advertising mechanism for the service academies to have them in that game. But like you said, this is way above, everybody's head here in terms of what they're going to be, who's going to approve it and not. Matt,
Yeah.
my friend, thank you so much for meeting here. And again, I'm going to make sure I include a link to your to Extra Points down here in the description of this video. But tell anybody else where they can find you.
You bet. I appreciate that. You can find my newsletter, Extra Points, at extrapointsmb.com. I am still going to be talking to people at EA and in the licensing industry and at the school level and filing open records to learn more about this project. And if I know something, it will be on the website. And there's a little tag. You can just look just for the EA Sports things. Or you can find me at Twitter at Matt Brown EP.
Awesome. Well, Matt, my friend, thank you so much. And we look forward to any updates you can give us, my friend.
You bet. I appreciate you having me on. Thanks.
All right, thanks, man. All right, guys, thank you so much for being here. Remember, please like, share, comment, subscribe, do all that stuff. I really appreciate it. That's it for me, guys. I'll see you guys later. I am out.